I already explained your background, Joke, before you arrived, but I will say a few words extra. Much of your work is related to time and memory. And I read on your website a quote which said, "Against the spirit of the time, she explores the importance of rest, boredom, waiting, important conditions for creativity and thinking since antiquity, that have lost their appeal somehow in these economic times." So, the word is to you. Time is on your side, at least for 45 minutes.
Kun je helpen met dit apparaatje? Ja, ben ik verstaanbaar? Ja. Oh, dat is mogelijk. Ik hoor mezelf eigenlijk nauwelijks. Maar als u mij maar hoort. Time on our side. Deze titel van een beruchte Rolling Stones song is niet zo evident als zij wellicht destijds dachten. En waarom niet, dames en heren, vormt de inzet van mijn betoog wat ik voor u op papier heb gezet, omdat het in het Engels moet en dat niet mijn taal is, waarvoor dus onmiddellijk al mijn excuses. U zult het ermee moeten doen en we proberen een eindje te komen. Nadat Robbert ons op zijn fabelachtige wijze tot in de allerverste hoogte van ons denkvermogen en ons voorstellingsvermogen heeft gebracht. En ons meegevoerd heeft naar afstanden die we eigenlijk niet kunnen bevatten, ga ik proberen u allemaal weer helemaal terug op aarde te brengen en nog dichter bij uzelf eigenlijk te brengen. Laten we zeggen, we gaan proberen om de tijd die Robbert op weergaloze wijze de ruimte ingesmeten heeft, dat ik hem met u stapje voor stapje terugwandel, als het ware. Ja, en dat was de Nederlandse introductie. En nu ga ik verder in het Engels. Oké. Our experience of time has been fundamentally changed during the last 100 years. On the one hand, there seems to be an acceleration of time. Everything seems to move quicker and change sooner. And on the other hand, there's a growing sense of lack of time. Technological development has led us to a strange paradox. The more time-saving machines we have developed, the busier we became, the less time we seem to have. That is strange. How come? What produced this lack or scarcity of time? I think that the rather strict time regime of Western economics, introducing the fabric clocks, the timetables, the fixed working hours, and the time is money principle, has increased this pressure on time. We seem to run after time, and time seems to run after us. And while running, we seem to have forgotten, that's the main thesis of my book, that there are at least two different time concepts Western and Eastern philosophers throughout the century have tried to describe. On the one hand, we have the time we measure, and on the other hand, we have the time we experience ourselves. Or, to put it in other words, we have the time of society, of economy, of science on the one hand, and we have an inner experience of time on the other, which is far more difficult to describe, since it expresses not a standardized or measurable time, but only a time that stretches along more subjective patterns, so to speak. This other time dimension can be experienced mostly during moments of doing nothing, of waiting, of resting, of boring, of inner reflection or deep concentration. Then time no longer follows a linear direction. Present and future are no longer separated but seem to intertwine. Over the past few years, this difference in worldly clock time, so to speak, and the inner experience of time has been the subject of my books. The time of clock has become a rather abstract and social time, something we have established in order to organize the world, manage international transport, do business. But as soon as you disembark from this socio-economic time that rules the world, like I did again this summer while staying 2 months in a tiny village in a very sleeping valley in France, you experience immediately another time experience, without clocks, dates and hours, but only different gradations of lights, from the delicate morning to the intense and blinding blue light of noon and the dusky shades of evening. That's all there is, day in, day out, sun rises and sets again. And although this might seem to you a bit boring, this uninterrupted flow of time, I always experience during this summer that this time provokes, apart from rest and calmness, a profusion of thoughts, fantasies, experiences and memories, and form together really the new material from my new novel I'm writing. And there's more. Although over there I hardly know what day or what hour it is, I do have the impression that finally, after my very busy life in town, time has become mine again. So however complex the phenomenon of time is, my suggestion in my book Stil de Tijd is in fact rather simple. Since the introduction of Greenwich time at the end of the 19th century, our lives have more and more been ruled by the clock. We have forgotten that besides having time or not having time, we also are time, as the French philosopher Henri Bergson puts it. This internal or personal time is difficult to label or pin down because it cannot be expressed in common units, such as hours or minutes. On the contrary, it can only be experienced if we leave this thinking of time as a clock, or as William Faulkner wrote, the American author, clocks slay, in fact, time. Time is dead, as long as it is being clicked off by little wheels. Only when the clock stops does real time come to life. So this inner experience of time is seen as the real time, much more real or truthful than the clock time. And although very little can be said about this internal time from a scientific point of view, I do believe it's time to start focusing on again. My point is not to exchange clock time for inner time. What I suggest, to put it very shortly, is to give a contemporary interpretation of a very old Greek idea, in fact, that time has two faces. On the one hand, there is chronos, from which the word chronology derives from. It's the linear, the measurable time, the time we can measure in order to structure our world, in order to be able to have this meeting here at this time. But on the other hand, and you find this idea in many old Greek philosophers and poets, we have this very mysterious concept which is called the kairos. I don't know whether you've ever heard about it. Kairos is the other face of time. Kairos is the not chronological, not measurable, not exterior time that's structuring the world. No, Kairos has been seen as a kind of an interruption or intermezzo on the chronos, on chronological time. It's also, for the Greeks, was Kairos the holy moment when the gods interfered in human existence and tried to change the stream of events. Kairos was therefore be seen as the kind of a divine inspiration. What I'm trying to look for in my latest work is in fact a modern interpretation of this kairos, this other concept of time we have really forgotten about. I mean, every time you look at the clock, you're not thinking about kairos, you're thinking about the time of the world, the worldly time that structures your calendar, your agenda. Throughout the centuries, there have been other interpretations of this kairos. I would like to share some others with you because it would help to clarify this rather mysterious concept, which has to do with experience, the highly personal, subjective experience of time, which is other than clock time. So far, we can define it as such. But then, for instance, 1,000 years after the Greek philosophers, we have Augustinus, St. Augustine, who wrote one of the most intriguing texts on time. And he must come to the conclusion that, according to him, the only thing he can really say about time, about experiencing time, is that while he is doing it, he is experiencing the depths, the profound depths, as he writes, of his animus in Latin, which can be translated by mind or by soul. Augustine also writes, if you don't ask me what time is, I know it very well. I experience it. Time is something not so difficult for us to feel or experience. But the minute you ask me to describe what time is, I'm lost. This idea of not being able to grasp the experience of time in words or definitions is like a leitmotif in the whole history of philosophy and even of literature. I think that this old Greek idea of this experience of time like a kairos, like an intermezzo of the chronos, has something to do with Augustine's experience of measuring time as if he is measuring the depths, as he puts it, of his animus, of his soul, of his most inner subjectivity. What are we doing today? I think today we are living completely according, if you could say, put it like this, according to the rules of Chronos. I don't think that any of you, when you are rushing from one appointment to another and are looking at your watch or the clocks that are in overall, every time when you're measuring time, that any one of you is having the impression that he's measuring his or her soul. That this clock you are advising constantly, this clock that is structuring your world, and this clock that is determining, in fact, your whole existence, that it still has to do anything at all with yourself. So we could say that for us, very busy, clockwise, clock-conscious, 21st century Western modern humans, we have forgotten that time has two faces. We have forgotten that you cannot only measure time, but also experience time. Now, why is this so important? Why is it the whole thesis in my book that we have forgotten that we don't only have or have not time, but that we are also time. And why is the thesis behind all the essays in my book that talk about this inner time, this kairos, in art, with the paintings of Rothko, for instance, in music, in the compositions of someone like Simeon ten Holt, in the works of Proust, who's constantly à la recherche of this interior time, this temps perdu. Virginia Woolf, who maybe is the most experimentary author we've ever read, tries to write it down, tries to approach this kairos, this experience of inner time. Why am I looking for this? So many years already. Why is it important? What's the use of having another phase of time? Why do we need it? Well, then I forget about my paper because I can't read English, I can't talk English, can't read English. I just continue like this because I can put off my glasses. That's very well. So. Why is it important to make the distinction? Überhaupt, that's not an English word. Why is it necessary to make the distinction between measuring time and experiencing time, between exterior clock time, which comes to us as an external structuring regime, and the experience of something that has to do with ourselves? Why? Because, and that's the other main thesis in my book, it's one of the, how do you call it, fundaments of humanity. Probably only humans make this difference. Probably only we know the difference between Chronos and Kairos. Probably only humans depend for their humanity, for the humanness of their humanity, on being able to make this difference. And why? Because this Kairos collects a number of phenomena, experiences, which in fact are our source of inspiration in order to be able to create something new, to have a new thought, to make a new design, to think of something new. The source of inspiration which enables us to break open, so to speak, the general language. We all have to speak in order to understand each other, and leave, while breaking this open, this signature, this personal signature, which creates this new design, this new thought, this new idea. Why is that? In my book, and it's much too complex to explain it all to you, I try to develop, with the help of Bergson, the famous French mathematician and philosopher who gave lectures with Einstein on time at the Collège de France at the beginning of the 20th century, while in the meanwhile disagreeing with Einstein. They both disagreed with each other. They didn't read each other very well, but they both wanted to develop another thought of time than the, and Robert already told us, that so-called neutral Newton time, which is a stable and unchanging time. They both wanted to develop another approach of time, and Bergson went very far in developing this idea, what he calls time as duration. Now, this time as duration concept is something we can only experience from within. It's a kind of kairos, to schematize a bit for you. It's not chronos, it's not clock time. It's not something that's measurable. It's not something that is coming from the exterior, no exterior law. Temps comme durée, time as duration, tijd als duur, is a completely different time concept than the mechanical clock time. Why? Temps comme durée is a timely approach of time, according to Bergson, while clock time, as I call it in my book, to summarize the external time, is a spatial approach of time. That's his most important thesis. Now, why is that? Well, clock time divides all the time units into the same parts. As if you roll out a centimeter and on it there are all the seconds and minutes and hours, and they are all separated from each other, and they are all the same. And it's a linearity, it's a line. So these three aspects make that Bergson called it a spatial approach of time, while time is something that is during all the time. Time is something that doesn't separate into isolated units, each part of time, each momentum. No. Time is something which dures and which collects, so to speak, every moment that is passing away. It doesn't separate 1 minute from another. They are connected. Every moment is connected to the other, like a big snowball, he says, which is growing because it's rolling and collecting more snow, and each crystal of the snowball is still connected to another. That's one idea. And the other very important thing is that all, because they are not separated into exactly the same minutes or seconds or hours, they are it's a heterogeneous, dynamic approach of time. And you recognize it immediately. You know very well that the hours on the clock doesn't at all resemble your own experience of time. You know very well that 1 hour can dure really like 6 hours because it's so boring. And another hour, why it's so exciting, feels like 5 minutes. You know very well that no hour is the same. And you know also very well that no hour is separated from the hour that was before or after. You know, you experience. And everything you have experienced now here this hour will change the hour that comes after it. So these are the two aspects from this modern kairos, maybe you could call it like this other idea, other approach of time developed by Bergson. Now, the problem is that this inner time, this time as duration, cannot be measured, just like the kairos. It's unmeasurable because it's unchronological, because it does not divide each moment into separated objects, separated units. And you know very well, when you want to define something, when you want to describe something, you have to isolate it from its context, determine the frontiers and the contours of it, and then name it. But this inner time as duration, which resembles much more all our experience of time, is borderless, as it were, because every moment is connected to another. So it's undescribable. But because it's undescribable, it doesn't mean that it's unimportant. On the contrary. It's not unimportant because it approaches much more our experience, our own experience of time. It is important because it's a more timely approach of time. And third of all, it is so important because, as I said already, contains our source of inspiration. Now, why is that? According to Bergson, and it's an idea I find also in works of other philosophers like Ernst Bloch, for instance, but also in Proust, of course, this unsayable not definable, not measurable, but yet very timely experience of time collects also, because it is this snowball, it collects everything you've ever experienced, but has sunk into an unconscious level, because otherwise you go completely mad. You can't recollect everything you've always lived. You can only save of that maybe 1%, not even, I think. But it's not gone. Everything you have experienced, felt, thought, lived is not gone. Why would it be gone? That's a strange idea. And we know we are changing all the time, that we are becoming subjects, that we are not fixed like this table, which will always be this same table. No, we know that what is humanity is growing, is becoming, is changing. That's humanity. And why can we do that? Because we have this double-phase time with a general, if I could, universal time, clock time, which organizes our world very, very practically. But on the other hand, we have this inner experience of time. We cannot measure, we cannot make a clock of it. We can experience it when we take, quand le moi se laisse vivre, says Bergson, when we let our lives live, take rests, do not hurry from one action to another, from one appointment to another, when we wait, when we stand still, when we daydream, when we are bored, when we do nothing, when we wait, as Maurice Blanchot calls it, the French philosopher who took a lot of ideas from Bergson. When we wait and wait and wait, and then we create a kind of dialogue between these two phases of time. We create a communication, we could say, or a relation between the two. But normally, we think, because we're so busy, that the time is only the clock time. But this clock time is a very strange concept of time. It's practical. Of course, it has been derived from the sun that goes up and down, the 24 hours, etc. But it doesn't at all look like our experience of time. Now, because this inner time as durée, as duration, this also contains everything we've ever lived and experienced but do not remember anymore. It has been seen as the ultimate source of inspiration. It's like, how to put it, it's like when you arrive in rest, calmness, to start this dialogue between those two times, to listen to this inner time. As if you then enrich what you are making with your most singular experience. And you need this. And you want to make something else than anybody else. You need this personal, most singular signature. What time is it?
You've got another quarter of an hour.
Is it clear so far, this double-phased aspect of time? Is it also clear why it's important?
Very much so.
Yeah? Then I would like to make another step with you, which is, in fact, a rather important concept in my work, and it's not only that we are that I try to develop this double-phased time and this difference between measuring and experiencing exterior, interior, but also that I try to relate it to a thought in Western philosophy which has really been developed during the last 100 years, and that is the concept of the two-voiced human. This double-faced time can be related to this double-edged human. Why is the human double? Well, for instance, we have our consciousness. We are conscious of a lot of things. We can describe what we are, and giving them the whole, what Heidegger calls the whole sum of facticity, all the factual facts of your whatness. Now, what am I? I'm a woman, I'm a mother, I'm a writer, I can give you a few hundred facts, and then you know my whatness. There's everything that is conscious about me, that is sayable, measurable, identifiable, thank you, identifiable, is the conscious part of my subjectivity. This whatness I do share with this table. Also from this table I can make an endless list of characteristics, of what facts. But the joke is, well, joke, yeah, that I am not only this whatness, but I am also who-ness. Qui and quod. We find it back from Aristotle to Hannah Arendt, from Plato to Freud, with his whole development of the unconscious. The difference between what I call I, identity, my whatness, etc., conscious story, and unconscious self. Simone de Weil, another French philosopher, I do love the French, as you might hear, give a short definition of what is humanity. Humanity is being able to make the difference between I and self. And I do agree. Because my who-ness gives me this surplus of consciousness, gives me also this surplus of being which I cannot define yet. And I think that all human desire comes from this yet. Because we have this unsayable surplus, which perhaps is lying in this inner time as duration, we don't know yet who we are. We do know what we are, but we do not know who we are. And then we have, of course, the Oracle of Delphi, which gave us the most important task for humanity, which says, know thyself. Everything you have to do in your life, says this Oracle in Delphi, is giving answer to one question you cannot answer. And that question is, who are you? And all you can reply is what you are. And this difference between who-ness and what-ness creates the same spanningsverhouding. Tension. Same tension within humanity as the difference between time as chronos and time as kairos. Conscious, unconscious. Creativity, is the result from that tension. Because if you would only be this whatness, you wouldn't be able to make a distinction between you and all other humans. We would not be able to recognize you. We couldn't know you. You would share some community facticities with your sex and your age and but you would not be this unique person who is able to create. In short, what I try to show in my book, with the help of philosophers, writers, artists, musicians, is that creativity, creating a new thought, design, music, everything is always the result of this inner dialogue between chronos and kairos, ik and I and self, conscious, unconscious, whatness and who-ness. That is, to put it very shortly, the main thought behind my work. And now, what is so dangerous about these ages? You could fit it in, I hope. If we only lived according to the clock, according to this external time, if we forget that we are time, if we don't have time to experience this inner time, we are losing ourselves. We are being reduced to whatness. We become things. Things that look alike, say the same things, repeat the same opinions. Freedom, according to Bergson, is only possible from within the inner time of duration, from this other unconscious and unclear story of the self. That's why the subtitle of my book is its plea for a slow future, because since the Greek, we only are here on paper 2,000 years and so. We don't really have thought so many new things, despite what Robbert might let us believe before me. If you read Plato, you see that we are still struggling with the same concepts, the same questions. Like time, for instance, like soul, for instance, like creativity, like humanity. Plato said that rest is the condition for thought. Plato wrote in the Republic that what a tyrant is doing is keeping his people all the time at work, so that they stop thinking, so that they stop being critical. A democratic statesman has to foster rest. Schole, it's called, the word in Greek. Our word school derives from that. My children don't believe that. But it is, and I believe it's true, it's my own experience as a writer. I think it's probably also your experience as artists, that you need time on your side in order to be able to create, that you need to slow down every once in a while, that you dare to be idle and do nothing, or to quote Gertrude Stein, if you want to become a genius, she wrote, you really have to do nothing for a very long time. And of course she's right, because only from this rest, Kairos can break into the Chronos. We can experience inner time as a source of inspiration, otherness, and our own most hidden personal history. But we have to slow down. And if we do not, I can promise you that humankind not only slips into a very scary big hole, but before he does so, he has already become a thing. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Joke. I would like to ask Robbert and Joke to take a few minutes to sit there, so that there is a slight opportunity for us to raise some questions, which could come from the audience. So if there's anything that you would want to put forward to these two eminent guests, you won't see them in a long time because they have packed agendas, do it now. I have one question for you, Robbert. You heard this plea for slowing down. Is it blinding you?
Yeah, it's completely. Well, I can't go sit on his lap, of course. Yes, very good.
Thanks a lot. We know a bit about your agenda, which is managed by someone even. If you hear this debate for slowing down, is that something that you can relate to?
Oh yeah, very much. I think it's really the core of creativity. I must say that your remark of that we live in kind of exceptional times where everything is rushing by. I mean, sometimes as a scientist, I immediately start thinking, well, you know, if you read people from 100 years ago, 500 years ago, they have the same complaint.
Yeah.
So, and still they did very well, you know. Certainly if you go like 1900s, you know, when, of course, with the industrialization, and I think rightly so, people are very much worried. So I think this kairos, I like it, this idea very much, and I think indeed what you're saying, it's a dialogue between the two. Because, but what I feel is I feel some sense subconsciously that you projected some kind of characters to Kronos and Kairos. And Kronos was like the accountant, and Kairos was the artist. And I think actually I say, well, Kronos is like being physical time. I think actually we should be a little bit more generous. I think also there's more life to it. And also I think Kairos actually can have various incarnations.
Of course, he has already.
And so one could be, you know, to be for 2 months in a sleepy French village, which can be exceptionally inspirational and
Is
creative.
that a way to you to get to new ideas?
Sometimes, but sometimes it's going to a gathering of friends, which is completely hectic, and then, you know, but the ideas are buzzing around. And you have the same idea of kind of time slowing down, but in a very, from the outside, it looks very hectic and rushed. So I think there are, I think the most important thing is, I think that was your message, to become your own master of your time. So I think that actually aspect, I think.
Do you still feel that that's the case with you also?
Sorry?
Are you still mastering your own time?
But you have to actually, well, I wrote actually a column in the newspaper about it. I think actually you have to have some kind of good alternation of the two.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Yes.
I think you too, you enjoy your sleepy village. Because there is some other period of the year that you're not in the sleepy
And
village.
I love the world at the same time, so
Yeah.
it's both. It's
Because
not
that was what I
or,
was
but-
wondering about. To me
yeah.
personally, for instance, deadlines are almost vital.
Yeah.
You need a sort of pressure, because otherwise nothing will happen. Or is that not the case with you?
Not with novels. Nobody ever asked me for
No?
a deadline for my novel.
They don't
Thank
give you
God.
a payment in advance with a certain date to it.
No, it's really completely. It's a product nobody's waiting for. Nobody is pushing me, and that's why it's maybe I like it so much to write it. But there's something else about this acceleration of time. It's true. Even Augustine complained in the 5th century that he was so busy.
Yeah.
Well, if he would have seen us now, he would have been surprised, I think.
Do you think
But,
so?
You know, it's not only working. It's not only that the work targets are being stressed all the time, that we have to do the same amount of work with fewer people, and that that work is so important. But it's all when we come home and we think, we take our rest, we sit on the couch, we put on the television, we go zapping for 3 hours.
Yes.
We think we are at rest, but our brain make overtime. It costs a lot of brain energy to decode all the images and all the messages sent to us through the screens of the television and the computer. So that's why you're so tired when you have been zapping for 3 hours. So I would say you could slow down the future not only by going to some sleepy village, but also by leaving the machines out. At least for 1 hour, try it. 1 hour,
Just as a
no
recipe for the day.
machine at all. Try to sit on a couch and do nothing and feel this fear of emptiness. we all have nowadays. Who dares to sit on the couch doing completely nothing for 3 hours? Hardly anybody. It frightens us because we are so used of being distracted.
I think actually you have also this actually I think it's quite an interesting research topic at this moment, right? If this kind of modern lifestyle is more productive or not. I mean, I think at the end you can look back and say, was this a time great novels were written, great paintings were made, big mathematical theorems proved. I mean, there are some objective criteria, and I find interesting that research shows that people who do this multitasking, they are actually very bad at various aspects. In fact, they're also bad at multitasking.
Yes.
So people who are not doing this, if they're giving a task, now you do 10 times at the same time, they're better in it, doing this, than the people who describe themselves as being very
multitaskers.
good. So I think that the only actual fact is that you think you are very good in it. And that's, of course, very scary. If you all start to think that we are absolutely genius, but we are not, then actually I think the whole society will be a poorer society.
And one of the geniuses you quoted, namely Einstein,
Yes.
was he pressed for time?
No, I think he, well, of course, he was a very complicated person. Who also, it's easy to project all kind of stereotypes, but it's of course true that he did his most important work at relative isolation. Or he worked at the patent office, and but also when he finally had this dream job in an institute with no responsibilities at all, and he could think for 30 years straight on one subject, and nothing came out. So it's that's. Unfortunately, it's. I think it might be a good kind of. It's a necessary condition, but it's not sufficient just to have time.
No.
How do you both think these notions that you put forward, the inner time, but also the idea of time that could end, how does that relate to a community that has to think about the designs of the next 10 years, 50 years, 100 years? What would be your advice to a designer or a designer in training?
Well,
your advice was Gertrude Stein. Just lay on the bed.
Yes, slow down, be idle, do nothing every once in a while, and you will see how productive it is. It really is.
Productive idleness.
Yeah.
Actually, I think design is of course a very fascinating step, because in some sense we can kind of philosophize or theorize. It's very safe, right? We're not shaping society, but of course design is in some, and of course again looking back, you can see that you can shape society in a very unfortunate way. So I think actually we need lots of creativity to think of what is the different way in which we can lead our lives. In the 8-hour workday, as you say, just being slave to your calendar. All of this can change, but I think we need designers or something. I mean, my overall feeling is there's such an enormous world to be discovered everywhere.
Could they
philosophy,
join?
but also just in shaping our society. So we need enough crazy ideas.
Could they join you in your research? Is there a basis of understanding?
I think I have to be very honest. That to be a theoretical physicist, it's really like it's like playing a very difficult instrument. So you have to practice for 10 years, and then you can start in the back of the orchestra.
But could there be a discussion? Could there be something of a link? Or is that even that is too difficult?
Well, I would say so. Of course, I mean, what you should do is try to imagine what all the theoretical models of Robbert and his colleagues mean. I mean, if I was a designer, I would dream of doing that, of designing futurist worlds, this baby universe. I mean, you're quite a good designer yourself if you make all these images. But I mean, they are inspiring, aren't they? Also, for instance, the notion of schuim. What's schuim in English?
Foam.
Foam by Peter Sloterdijk, one of the philosophers I think is really interesting. Also for you to read, is that the the times yet to come are more foam. We are all in our individual bells, but together we still form communities, which of course is very different from the huisje, boompje, beestje, or gezin as hoeksteen van de samenleving. I mean, sorry for that in Dutch.
Well, you know
really,
what we're talking
about. We are far
about.
away from that. I think we should. You should. I think, in any way, designers are nowadays the voorhoede of de beeldende kunst. I mean,
The avant-garde of visual
I really
arts.
think so.
Well, if I can
There was
add
a question.
Oh, sorry. If I can just add one
Yeah,
word, because
sure.
I was perhaps... thank you for actually bringing this forward. But because I do feel that, you know, in some sense, in our design, we are reflecting what we know of the world. And I often feel a little bit silly, you know, we are studying like the universe. And it's like our universe, right? It's not only in a PowerPoint, it's actually around us here. And that it should, some sense, reflect on our own life. You know, 2,000 years ago, people would walk in and look outside and see the sky. They actually see the universe. And now we kind of put it away, and we see it on a PowerPoint slide or something. But I think if it would, some sense, again, physically
Absolutely.
be present in our environment, I think would actually help us in some sense.
Make it in a sense more tangible, more real.
Why wouldn't we?
I'll give you a microphone.
May I ask just one question?
Go ahead.
Because I have been wanted to ask you this question for some time now after reading your books. Did you know you figure in one of my novels?
Yes.
Oh, you do? And that then you were lecturing on time in
Yes.
Paradiso. Oh,
Yes.
you know that. Well,
What
anyway.
a shame.
No, I didn't want to tell that. I have this question because I think it was then that you said that scientists like yourself, and yourself being a very creative mind, do not work alone anymore, but mostly work in communities.
Yes.
And that is for me as a philosopher and a writer so difficult to understand. I mean, I must always think about Simone Weil, who says a group cannot think. And
But can I say something? Because
Yes.
it's
And
about this interior and exterior.
Yes.
Because
Please.
we have this image of the human life as a soap bubble or something, but I feel my interior life is often like a soap bubble, and I have like a good idea, but I meet my colleague, and he
Okay.
punctures the soap bubble.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
he's... so in that sense, I feel this external world can be just as part of the creative process as the internal world. And then it's this dialogue between interior and exterior, and that's why I'm saying I in some sense have a much more pleasant image of this exterior world, because I feel many people like which are some sense.
It's your audience also, and your colleagues.
But in some sense, you are in discussion with yourself
Of
through
course,
this. But
of
I
course,
need often
yes.
other people to do so.
But you do say...
Probably you also build on what other people think within their bubble.
Yes.
And somehow or other you collectively develop a body of knowledge.
Yes, but it helps. I must say, it does help to have a more more an objective object that you're studying.
Yeah.
There's a question.
That's a question. Yes.
It's up to you.
Shout.
It's on.
I've become really nervous now. Like,
No problem.
okay, I've got a question about like our technical evolution with more and more information coming into our homes and to our life. Like we're a new generation that has to deal with all this massive information and text on your brain. What do you think about the next generation? Do they like my little sister already has a cell phone, has Amazon? Do you think the human brain will still evolve into dealing more with this information? Is there space in the
Well,
brain?
if we have to believe the neurologists, they are warning in most of their studies that I have seen for a burnout of our brains. Because also our brains need to defocus. That's what I'm told. Need to take rest. Need to not being on the phone or behind the computer, but really relax, doing absolutely nothing. And in the Netherlands alone, we have 2 million prescriptions a year of calming and sleeping pills in order to keep us alive or keep us functioning. So I'm not sure whether our brains would
Yeah, but
adapt
aren't you
very
scared of technical like progress like is like went into a way and like keeps evolving, like being like the Japanese coming up with like more like
Yes, I know.
it's like
Yes, well,
I don't know if you can like stop it by just sitting on a couch. Like,
you know, I'm
or,
not.
like move on.
Yes,
Like
I'm not an
moving train.
anti-technology.
Do you have an alternative
like-
strategy or not?
And, well, no, yeah, we're the designers, so we have to do it. But
No, just unplug. That's my thing. Just unplug every day, at least an hour. Put the phone out. That's what I'm trying to tell my daughter, who's 17 years old. It's a very difficult message for her. Extremely difficult. But I see her getting overspannen when she's talking, you know, on the phone for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours.
Can I say something? I think in 50 years, I mean, perhaps this is preserved, and people will look back on this. And I think I'm very curious to know how they look at these discussions.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if you go back in time again, there are discussions when just the books were invented, that people say, no, we completely flooded. Already in the 15th, 16th century, they said, there's this chaos of books, you know, how can we read this? But I think they're right in some sense, because they were dealing with these books in a very different way than now. When I'm walking through a library or something, I certainly do not feel the urge to read everything. So I think it's about controlling it. But your point about the flexibility of the mind, actually here I'm very different opinion. I think actually, you know, our mind is able to do things that we cannot yet imagine. But in order to prevent all these prescriptions,
Well,
we have to do it in a clever way.
Be careful.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
But I think our life will, in 50 years, we're completely unrecognizable. But just the fact that right now, I have basically here in my pocket all the information in the world, you know, I think I'm using this in a completely silly way, but potentially, I think, our life can change in a way which we cannot imagine, I feel. I guess part of your job is to try to imagine this and lead people to new ways to
Sensible
cope with it.
uses.
Yes. Yeah.
Are there any other people who want to intervene? You've got the chance now. No? Could you use the microphone?
No, I was wondering, just in when you were talking about the black holes, Robert, I'm talking to, sorry.
You also talked about that.
Yeah, no, but I was just
we do,
wondering, because
yes.
at one point you were saying that there could be this time that everything is turning to a black hole, and we are sort of consumed by this black hole, but
Yes.
I'm wondering about the, since our universe is like expanding, it all depends on the snelheid, the
Velocity.
the speed, how fast everything is expanding, because
Yes.
it depends on the speed of our
Yeah. So
you say that the speed of the black hole and the
Yes.
speed of the expanding of the universe. So
right.
how
Well, actually,
where do those three meet? At what point?
Well, okay. So the thing is that this kind of velocity by which the universe expands is growing and growing and growing. It's not stopping. So that's the reason why at some point everything is gone. And then I think you're left with just, as I say, this little island, which kind of burns out of energy, literally, and then it stops. So I must say there have been some physicists who say, no, well, could we still keep living? Perhaps not as a human being, but like a computer or something. And they had very clever ideas. I must share them with you, because they said, what does it mean to live for an eternal life? Well, it's like you have a computer, and it has its battery, and you're not able to recharge. So can you use this computer internally? You would say no. But they say, wait a moment, you can just shut it down and have a little alarm clock that wakes you up after 1 million years. You do something, and you put the alarm back, but now for 1 billion years, and try to kind of keep on living. And actually, there are some physicists who devise schemes like this, and I think this is very creative, because in some sense, even if you think about surviving to the bitter end, we have to think creatively.
We've got a theme for next year, eternal life.
Yes.
Thank you very much. You said time's flowing. You can't stop it. Can you slow it down?
Your experience, yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
And also in a physical sense? Can you?
Yeah, that's the most amazing thing. So if actually, if you, this is a first famous conclusion of Einstein, if you go into a rocket, which goes extremely fast, you basically slow down time. So you come back with your rocket on Earth, and then it took you 1 year, and life has been 2,000 years here. And in fact, we do this all the time. For instance, we see this with little particles. They go so fast that really the time slows down. And they did one experiment. They put a clock into a jumbo jet and had it fly around, for a few years, just on the regular flights, took it out, and indeed it was like 1 nanosecond slower. So actually, that clock is very fortunate.
That's
it has,
amazing.
Yeah.
I would like to thank you both
Yes,
very much for an inspiring talk.